Chapter 19. Visiting with Ghosts. I got on top of the bedbug situation right away. I called the owners directly and raised holy fucking hell. I was not like your typical reticent and reluctant tenant. If I felt like I was getting fucked over for the price I paid in rent, I'd let you know in no uncertain terms. If there was one thing I had learned about myself over the years, I may be the sweetest lover boy you were ever likely to meet, but if you cross me, I'll fucking crush you. They swore up and down that they were getting the issue solved and were having exterminators assess the situation post-haste. The bad news was that I had just unpacked and organized everything. I'd have to repack it all into trash bags, have everything dry cleaned, bag up all of my electronics, and stay out of my place for 24 hours while they exterminated the entire building. Suffice to say, it was an exhausting task. Though the whole building was infested, Uncle Robert still didn't have any bites. The son of a bitch was probably so toxified with so many chemicals in his bloodstream, they likely didn't find him appetizing. He was happy to have me living in the building with him, though I made it clear to him that I wanted to be left alone and not pestered for money or favors. I wasn't trying to be stingy, but unless you laid down the line with people like Robert, they will try to get something from you every chance they get. They can't help themselves. They're takers, plain and simple. We hung out quite a bit, though. He'd come by and tell stories that I wrote into the narrative, and I'd take him for drives into Hollywood, listening to 70s lowrider tunes and eating at burger stands on Sunset Boulevard. But as his payee, I had to budget for him. I paid his rent and gave him $100 a week for food, bus fare, smokes, beer, and weed. That was plenty for him. And speaking of weed, I tried to continue selling it when I moved back to LA, but it was nearly impossible. People everywhere were getting medical marijuana cards. The days of the weed dealer were quickly becoming a thing of the past. I promised Marty I'd still come down to Long Beach a couple times a month to see Lourdes and would sell him his usual ounces. But he'd be my sole customer from there on out. I realized that I was probably a member of the very last old-school weed dealers in California's history. If I didn't have Uncle Robert's burnout buddies who couldn't get medical marijuana cards buying off of me, I could have never sustained a weed business. After the extermination, I got settled again. To my shock and surprise, Lourdes hadn't dumped me and was making regular visits to downtown. She'd drive up and take me to lunch in Silver Lake. We'd take walks around to Echo Park Lake, and I'd show her where my mother's childhood home was on Patton Street. She'd even spend the night sometimes, braving the bathrooms down the hall and the creepy neighbors. I'd still visit her in Long Beach as well, taking her and the baby to the beach and out to Port Sacal and San Pedro to have big platters of tilapia and potatoes and French bread, a classic specialty dish that vendors had served there for decades. It almost felt like she might stay devoted to me and wanted to start a new life together after all. But of course, it didn't last. She called me one day and said we had to stop, yet again. It's just that you're so far away now, and you have so much responsibility with Robert and Mickey, and Ken is starting to ask questions about our hanging out so much. It's just getting too stressful. There was no dread or heartache welling in me this time. I had grown so used to it at this point. I just said, "Okay, Lourdes, probably see you in a few months. When you come back next time, bring a 6-pack of Sierra Nevada, not that cheap Mexican piss you usually show up with." And hung up. Damn, that felt good to do. To really feel free of the many months of doom and gloom she so readily dragged me through. I had finally become callous to her utter bullshit. I still loved her intensely, but I was no longer crushed under her whim. Things must have been going well at home. A new car, a vacation, some more money pouring in, or some sort of prestige the butcher was receiving. But the minute shit started to hit the fan again, she'd show up at my door before too long, bearing gifts of beer and blowjobs. What I figured out was confirmed to me that day. I was nothing more than a convenient getaway. When the butcher was being a prick and the baby was making the place a mess, and he'd start coming down on her for not having cleaned or having his dinner ready, she'd take her revenge by biking over to my nice, clean, cool, and comfortable studio, get smoked out, get her pussy eaten, get fed, fawned over, worshipped from head to toe. I wasn't much more than a cabana boy to her. An escape. I had my hands full with more important issues anyway. Mickey was barely getting by day to day. He had very poor cognition and still hadn't recovered a lot of his memory. He had remembered his friends much better, who he was, who his family was, and where he grew up, but that was about it. He couldn't even leave his apartment by himself. He tried one day and walked around the corner and got lost for hours. His equilibrium was poor. He'd often stumble or sway and would have a hard time steadying himself. He had to carry a little notebook around in his pocket so he could write down numbers, addresses, and tasks that he had to take care of every day. I'd pick him up from his place and take him to his psych evaluations at Rancho Los Amigos, which was a rehabilitation center for people who were badly disabled or who had suffered major physical trauma. We'd walk through the lobby to his doctor's office, passing one mangled, deformed, crippled soul after another, their faces distorted, their limbs twisted and crushed, spinning around in electric wheelchairs, some with joyful smiles and enthusiastic voices, in spite of their tragic circumstances. Mickey would see the doctor. She was a Southeast Asian woman who barely spoke English. You could tell that she was tired, overworked, and underpaid. She'd bark some questions at Mickey, asking him how he felt and if he could understand her. I could hardly understand her myself, and I had my wits about me. Mickey would just nod and rattle off some disjointed sentences. There was no real communication, and from what I could see, nothing that was really helping. Mickey complained about feeling depressed. She gave him a prescription for an antidepressant, and that was that. I drove us out of there feeling grateful and thanking my lucky stars that I still had my physical and mental health more or less intact. It made me angry with myself for fretting over Lourdes and her shit, pining over someone who really thought so little of me and taking it, knowing full well what the truth was, when there were clearly more important things to be grateful for, to be happy about. Another premonition I had had soon came to pass. Uncle Robert was on his way down to Long Beach on the Blue Line to get his methadone when he started having chest pains. He collapsed. They called ahead and had an ambulance at the next stop waiting to rush him to the hospital. The doctors told him that he wasn't having a heart attack. They gave him a CAT scan and found a tumor between his heart and lungs, about the size of a golf ball, which meant that there was a good chance it had been there for a long while. Basically, he was in the final stages of cancer. I knew this was coming. I just knew it. They wanted to schedule treatment, chemo and radiation, but Robert didn't want to do it. He wouldn't even let them keep him in the hospital, signing a release so he could go home and feed his cats. They convinced him to take one chemo treatment, but he went and didn't like it, and wouldn't go back. I tried to arrange for an in-home nurse that would come and check on him and make sure he was taking his meds, but when she'd show up, he wouldn't answer the door to let her in. I'll give him one thing. He wasn't a bellyacher. He had learned long ago, the way Crow once had, while getting junk sick in prison cells, that you took your misery and sufferings quietly, like a man. You didn't dare whine about them. It would be considered a sign of weakness. Some weeks were better than others. He'd be down and out, no energy, depressed. Then one day you'd see him, fresh as a daisy, out and about, down on the corner, flirting with the waitresses at the coffee shop. It was on one of his good weeks that Mickey and I got him on film for the documentary. We set up a shot right around the corner at a sushi place that had a patio out back. I knew the owner well, and he let us do his interview there. He said we can take as much time as we wanted, which was good to know, because I wanted Robert to get out all his stories. He had 1 million of them, great ones, and I wanted to document them all. Say what one might about Robert, he was, without question, the best interview in the film, and one of the best interviewees I ever questioned. He gave me exactly what I was after. We got hours of footage, spanning subjects from rock and roll to his first time in jail, our family history, his relationship with his brothers and father, drugs, pimping and pandering, bank robberies, him and his friends hiding out down in Mexico after a heist. It was absolutely great. He knew how to tell a great story. He was clear, earnest, funny, poignant, sincere, a true raconteur. I knew these stories were in him. I remember him telling them as far back as when I was a boy, watching as his eyes, bright and expressive at first, becoming sleepy and droopy as he went on the nod, sitting down on the couch and falling fast asleep. We'd ask our father, "What's wrong with Uncle Robert, Dad?" "I don't know, son. I think his doctor gave him some medicine that makes him sleepy," he'd respond, unable to look us in the eye when he said it. He sat in front of that camera and told those stories like it was the last time he'd ever get the chance. And as it turned out, it was. It wasn't too long after that things got really bad. I was coming downstairs one day and saw a neighbor of ours helping Robert up the stairs. I rushed down to take him off our neighbor's hands. "What's going on, man? You can't get up the stairs?" I asked. "I can't, youngster. I can't," he said weakly in a whisper. He started doing something my father had done when he was sick. He was unable to complete sentences, forgetting words for things. Then one day he asked me for some money to get something to eat, when I had just gone to the store the day before and filled his cupboards and fridge with food. I showed him all the food he had. He just looked confused. I knew then that the cancer had spread to his brain. I had to sit him down and have a serious talk about getting him checked into a hospital. "What for?" he asked. "Look, man, you need a doctor's help. I can't take care of you. You're really sick, and all they want to do is make you feel better." I know he understood, but he tried to act like he didn't. He was understandably scared. "I need to get my methadone before I could go to the hospital. I ain't going till I get my shit." "Uncle Robert, they have methadone at the hospital." But he wouldn't listen. He couldn't get a new batch for another 2 weeks, and what could I do? I couldn't force him to go to the hospital if he wasn't ready. As if all that wasn't heavy enough, I ran into a couple of lost souls from the past. One day while getting gas on Alameda in Washington, I heard a familiar voice yelling out to me. It was Crow. I hardly recognized him. He didn't have his usual shaven head and cholo gangster attire. His hair was grown out, almost entirely white and parted on the side. He had on glasses and a matching denim outfit, stone-washed gray. I had seen this happen with old gangsters like him. They tried to clean up their appearance and look a little nerdy so cops wouldn't sweat them as much. He hugged me, but there was a weakness in his embrace. I grabbed him by the shoulder and looked him over. "Be careful, bro. I have a bullet in my arm," he said. I noticed that he had very sickly-looking green snot dripping out of his nostrils. His face looked gaunt and sweaty. I heard you moved back to the American, bro. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't have his number for one thing, but even if I did, I wouldn't have told him. I just told him I was taking care of Robert and Mickey and hadn't had the time to let anyone know. That's fucked up, bro. Your uncle is a solid old gangster. I'll come see him in the hospital. Just let me know where he's gonna be. But hey, bro, could you do me a favor? They always need a favor. Can you take me down Washington to score? I'm real sick, bro, and this bullet is hurting bad. Then can you drop me at my homegirl's house in Mid-City? I can drop you off wherever it is you need to score, but then I have to get back to Robert. I was lying, but my days of carting this motherfucker around were long gone. I dropped him about a mile away from the gas station. He leaned over to hug me, got out, and vanished down an alley. I never saw him again. Not long after, I got a call from an unfamiliar number and answered to hear a very familiar voice. It was Shasta. After I kicked her out, she went to go live with the people she was with the night she got arrested in front of the 7-Eleven. They spent most of their days scoring dope and shooting up. The three of them fell asleep after getting high one night and woke up to find one of them dead. She had been sleeping next to his dead body all day. You'd think that would be enough to stop her, but she just moved in with other friends in and around MacArthur Park, stealing stuff, selling it for drugs, even selling herself on occasion. I told her about Robert. She was very sad. They had grown close when we were all living together in Long Beach. He was her chess partner and brother in theft and addiction. I think they made a deeper connection than the two of us ever had. She asked if I could help her out. She was starving and had no money for food. She had been living in the park for months and finally found someone to put her up for a few weeks, but she didn't have a thing to eat. It broke my heart to hear that. I didn't like to think of anyone not having any food. So the next day I showed up at her new address with Mona in tow. I knew how happy it would make Shasta to see her. She adored Mona. But I was totally shocked to see the state of her as she came out of her front door. She was almost unrecognizable. She was rail thin. She had always been quite chubby the entire time I was with her, but she looked like a skeleton now. She jumped and squealed when she saw Mona, running over to the car. But Mona seemed to not know who she was. Usually a dog will remember someone they spent a lot of time with, at least their smell. But that is how different Shasta looked from their time together. As she got in, I could see that she was filthy. I could tell that she had been sleeping in the street. She had dirt under her nails, and her clothes were dusty. When she leaned in to hug me, I noticed that she had track marks all up the side of her neck. She smelled like sweat and grime. I know, I look like shit, Christian, she said with shame in her eyes, picking up Mona and hugging her close. No, you look fine, it's fine. Let's go get some food. I was trying my best not to cry. I took her out to lunch at a Mediterranean place I knew in Silver Lake. We ordered kebabs, rice, hummus, tabbouleh, falafel, and pita bread. She devoured it as if she hadn't eaten in days. Perhaps she hadn't. Then I took her to the Trader Joe's right next door to the restaurant. I got her 2 big bags of groceries, chips, crackers, frozen dinners, mixed veggies, cheese, 2 loaves of bread, peanut butter and jelly, milk, cookies, and cans of soup. I dropped her off at her apartment, and we sat with Mona on the grass out front and talked about the bad old days and even managed to laugh about some of them. Well, we got to get back to Uncle Robert. Take care of yourself, Shasta, I said, giving her a big hug. I could feel her bones up against me as she squeezed me tight. Thanks, Christian, for everything. And tell Uncle Robert I'm going to come visit him real soon. She hugged Mona one last time, and we got in the car to drive home. It was a relief to drive away, because I couldn't hold back my tears for another second. I wept all the way home. She never did come visit Robert. In fact, like Crow, I never saw her again. They both just vanished, like ghosts. Uncle Robert was in good spirits, though, trying to eat and wrapping his head around going into treatment. But then something happened that took the wind out of his sails once and for all. He had started letting Leo and Abigail out of his apartment. It was a small space, and they were stir-crazy. His window opened up to a single-story building that was connected to the American, whose roof was level with his window. He let them climb around out there and chase birds and mice. They'd always come back when they got tired or hungry, but Leo stopped coming back. There was a yard across from the American with a corrugated fence blocking it from the street. There was an old Airstream trailer sitting in the yard. Someone had left it open and placed tins of cat food all around it. It became a little haven for the stray cats in the neighborhood. Leo discovered it and became a member of their pride, probably impregnating the females by the dozens and doing battle with his rivals. Uncle Robert was okay with that, but not with what happened next. One day, he found little Abigail lying on her side in the windowsill. She had a rust-colored puddle next to her mouth. She was dead. They never figured out how she died. They thought she might have eaten something bad, or that she was possibly poisoned. Robert was utterly devastated. We all were. That was it. He had had enough of life. His will to live left him completely. He asked me to take him to the methadone clinic one last time, then to the hospital. He no longer cared what happened to him. I walked him out to the car. He was bone-thin and couldn't walk on his own. His green bathrobe looked 5 sizes too big on him. I held his arm every step of the way. We got to the clinic. It was in an industrial part of Wilmington. I walked him through the door. The receptionist gasped at the sight of Robert. She got him a wheelchair and wheeled him into his counselor's office. She was a large black woman. "Hey, Robert," she said sweetly. "Hanging in there, pal?" "Just need one more round, honey pie," he said, smiling. He asked me to wheel him to the bathroom. As he went in to do his business, I went back into the counselor's office and said, "He's not coming back here anymore." "I know," she said. "I know." We got his last round of methadone, wheeled him out to my car, and drove him to the Hospital of the Good Samaritan in downtown L.A. It was the same hospital that Robert Kennedy died in after being shot in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel. The doctor was an old Japanese man. He came into the examination room and very coldly said, "Oh yeah, your uncle has brain cancer. You see how his eyes are set sort of uneven? Yeah, tumors for sure." Then just walked out. Robert just laid there. He didn't even blink an eye. The motherfucker hadn't even examined him. I was burning with anger. I couldn't believe his callousness. I asked to speak to an administrator and gave her a ration of shit. I let her know that my uncle was going to receive proper and compassionate care, or heads were going to roll. She took one look in my furious eyes and knew that I meant business. As fucked up as his bedside manner was, the piece of shit doctor was right on the money with his diagnosis. They gave Robert another CAT scan and found that he had 19 lesions on his brain. It was just a matter of time. They wanted to put him in hospice right away and start a regimen of radiation and chemo. I was visiting him on the day they came to take him from the hospital to the hospice. I started heading home, but had an ominous feeling that I should swing by the hospice to check it out. I called the administrator that was handling Robert, and she gave me the address. When she did, I knew there was no fucking way. I knew that neighborhood. It was the worst in all of downtown. I drove by anyway. It was a total nightmare. It was the kind of place everyone hopes they never end up in. There were drug dealers outside, and addicts, and hookers, and bums. The nurses were all fat, black, mean-looking, and overworked. It was crowded and noisy. There were old people strapped to gurneys and left in hallways for God only knows how long. The whole place stunk of shit. I went to the front desk and asked to speak to the person in charge. An older black man came out. "Listen, man, my uncle just got checked in here, but I'm going to find him a place closer to me." He started shaking his head before I even finished speaking. Nah, your uncle ain't going nowhere. Once he's checked in, he can't leave until a doctor can check him out, and we ain't got no doctor for about a month." It was obvious they wanted him there for the insurance money. Uncle Robert had slyly been able to get full insurance benefits through the state, Medicare and Medi-Cal. A rundown shitty facility like this needed as much money coming through as possible. I got right in his face and said, "Listen good, motherfucker. If I have to come back here with a bulldozer and drive it through your front door, my uncle is leaving today." "Oh, no, he ain't," he said, scurrying back into his office to call security. I got in my car and called Robert's administrator and told her what happened. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Pasquale. What he said is not true in the least. We will take your uncle to any facility you wish. Just let us know. And I'm going to have a word with the person you spoke with. We've had issues with him before." When I got home, I got online and found a place just over the bridge in Boyle Heights called Hollenbeck Palms. I went over and checked it out. What a complete difference. It was beautiful. It had old Spanish-style architecture, a beautiful garden that overlooked the downtown skyline, a fountain, a chapel, and very nice, clean, quiet rooms. I talked to their staff, and they accepted Robert's insurance and had a room available. I called the shitty hospice in Mid-City and got the fucker I talked to on the phone. His tune had changed quite a bit since he got a call from the hospital administrator. "Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I sure am sorry for the misunderstanding, sir. We'll have Mr. Robert shuttled over right away, sir." "I told you he was leaving today, motherfucker, didn't I?" I said, hanging up. We got Uncle Robert set up in a nice room with a view outside overlooking the fountain. He started on a round of chemo, which made him lose all his hair very quickly. It only managed to stave off the inevitable. It made him a little more lucid and clear for a short time, but it didn't last. I got a hold of my aunt and uncle to give them an update. They'd been in touch asking questions about his progress, which was about all they were willing to be bothered with. That side of the family had always been a bunch of cold fish, very selfish, very disconnected. They couldn't be bothered to even visit until the very end. They showed up with a Tupperware full of baked ziti and some garlic bread. We sat in Robert's room exchanging pleasantries and eating the pasta. Robert was glad to see them. They were distraught and uncomfortable. The doctor came in and asked me into the hallway. He told me that Robert's prognosis had gone from bad to worse. He said he'd be lucky to last another 2 weeks. When I got back to the room, my aunt and uncle were ready to leave. It was clear that being there was causing them a lot of anxiety. They hugged their brother and told him they'd be back to visit again soon. When I got them out to the parking lot, I broke the bad news. Their faces turned a ghostly white. Over the next week, my sister and niece came up to visit, taking him for a spin in his wheelchair through the garden to the chapel, where they sat and prayed with him and lit a candle. Then his old girlfriend, Irene, from Long Beach, came to visit. They had a tearful reunion and made amends. Mickey and me would come visit too, bringing him all his favorite snacks like Snickers bars and especially Little Debbie's honey buns. Every respectable jailbird loves honey buns. We'd sit with him while he tried to eat, and he and Mickey would blather in broken sentences to each other, not making a bit of goddamn sense. And I'd sit there listening and would wonder how I found myself in the company of those two wackos. Then one late evening, I went to visit him by myself. He was struggling. He couldn't eat or shit or get comfortable. He whispered to me, "Make them give me some dope, youngster. Please." "Yeah, man, I'll make sure of it," I said, tears welling in my eyes. I asked the nurse, a large Samoan man, if we could give him some morphine. "Of course, man. We'll give him as much as he wants at this point," he said. They gave me some powdered form of morphine. We mixed it into some applesauce. I fed it to him. He swallowed it down, but you could tell it was hard for him. I held a cup of water up to his mouth, and he took a good gulp to wash it down. He fell asleep after that. I kissed him on the forehead and hugged him. "See you tomorrow, gangster," I said. I walked out fast through the lobby. I didn't want the nurses to see me crying. Early the next morning, they called to say that he passed away in the middle of the night. It was, to be very honest, a relief. When my father was sick, I wasn't present very often. My sister, stepmother, and my mom took the reins. I was young and just starting my life, and it was scary watching my father waste away. This time, it was my turn. It was redemption from all the guilt I felt for not being there for my dad as much as I could have. But now it was over. I did all I could. I got out of bed and went online to find a crematorium. I found one in East LA, not too far from the hospice. I went over there straight away and arranged for his cremation. They said they would send for the body and that it would take about a week. I called my aunt and uncle to let them know. They offered to pay for his cremation, which was the least they could do since they didn't do much else to help. I told them I'd put Uncle Robert's last Social Security check toward it as well. They might have told me to keep it for all the hard work it took caring for him, but they eagerly accepted my offer. I didn't care, though. Poor bastard had to pay for his own burning. What a world. A week later, I went to pick up his remains. The receptionist brought out what looked like a Christmas present. It was a medium-sized box wrapped in silver wrapping paper with a silver bow on top. I wasn't sure why she was handing it to me at first, and then quickly realized that it was his remains. They gave him back to me in a festively wrapped box. It was surreal. I called my relatives and asked them when they would like to hold a memorial. They said they'd have to arrange it with everyone's schedules and would get back to me. I rode around town with Uncle Robert in the trunk of my car for a solid month before they got back, saying they were having a hard time finding a good day for everyone to get together. A neighbor of mine was helping me load some video equipment into the back of my car, saw the wrapped gift, and asked, "Hey, is it someone's birthday or something?" "Oh no, that's just my Uncle Robert." He looked confused. Finally, I got tired of their bullshit excuses and delays. I got an invite to another Ink and Iron festival at the Queen Mary. I hadn't been in a few years and needed a good time after all the death and sadness I had been drowning in for months. I drove down to Long Beach and had a great time at the festival. I saw some great bands, ate some great food, had some laughs with some old friends, and got pretty damn drunk. It was getting late. I stood on the deck of the Queen Mary, and it came to me all at once. The perfect place for Uncle Robert's ashes. I got in my car and drove it through Belmont Shores, over the little bridge into Naples, and slowly past Lourdes and the butcher's house. They were having a big party inside. I looked through the window to see Lourdes dressed to the nines, glamorous, hair and makeup done perfectly. The butcher behind her with his hands around her waist, her leaning in to kiss him sensually. I just felt a numbness of a kind. Bitterness, too, for falling for such obvious bullshit for as long as I did. What a spell that fucking witch cast over me. I drove further south still, to a part of the inlet known as the Peninsula, at the very end of which was a jetty. It was the perfect place to lay Uncle Robert to rest. You see, the jetty was another cat sanctuary. They lived in great roaming prides all over it, sleeping in the rocky little caves with their kittens, lounging all day in the sun and ocean breezes. And Uncle Robert loved cats. And Belmont Shores is where Robert spent his heyday, cruising the strip with his brothers, making love to bikini-clad lovelies on the sand, under a warm summer moon, getting high and drunk when he was young and strong and alive. There was no more perfect place for him to spend the rest of eternity. I climbed down the rocks to get level with the water, carrying Uncle Robert's box in both hands. It was dark and I could barely see what I was doing. When I got level to the water, I unwrapped the box and tossed the paper onto the rocks. I opened the lid to see Robert's remains wrapped in a thick plastic bag, tied at the top with a zip tie. I struggled to get it untied, but couldn't. I got out my knife and cut it off. I took a deep breath and said, "So long, old-timer," and dumped his snow-white ashes into the black sea. At that very second, a wave came along and crashed some of them back onto my legs and feet, soaking them in seawater and Uncle Robert. I whispered to myself, "You old son of a bitch. A pain in the ass till the bitter end," and laughed out loud. I climbed off the rocks, peeled off my shoes and socks, threw them in a nearby trash bin, rinsed my feet and legs in a sprinkler, got in my car and drove back to downtown, barefoot, bewildered at our fate, bidding farewell, heart open, naked, tender, bruised, but still beating.